At CrossQ, we are deeply committed to the development and promotion of the regional quality infrastructure through standardization. Governance and sustainability are key elements for this, and as such, we are pleased to work shoulder to shoulder with the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards in this international event.
Trinidad and Tobago Fine Cocoa Company is proud to have partnered with TTBS to make this landmark event even sweeter. To all our guests, both regional and international, we wish you a safe, productive and enjoyable event.
EIG is proud to support TTBS in this endeavor and is confident that the 9th plenary meeting for ISO TC 309 will be a resounding success.
Blue Waters is committed to profitably inspiring and delighting those we choose to serve with quality, functional, and great tasting beverages. We are proud to support this landmark event for the country and the region.
On behalf of TTBS's Board of Directors and Management, we thank all our sponsors for making today's event a success. Thank you.
I've been patient and I've been waiting. Call me stubborn, but I can get over it. You left and never say goodbye. Those tears I cried, no, I can get over it.
So don't you ever let me down again. Cause I'm depending on you, so you better come through this time. Please hear my cry, and if I ever let you down, my friend, it was a misunderstanding. So if I took it for granted, then I promise from today I go jump like I never jump, wave like I never wave, wine like I never wine before, just to show you a sorrow, and I need you back in my life. Look at people by the truck, emotions running high, we end up in the sky, tears running down we high, can't you tell that we sorrow, and we need you back in my life, and if I come back home. Come home to me, come home to me. It's not no place like home. Come home to me, come home to me, come home to me. This is my apology. Follow me, come and see what you mean to all of we. You're a treasure in my eyes, the greatest pleasure in my life. Whoa. Just when you left it under me, honestly, how it is, home is where the heart should be. Pretty feathers in disguise, not together we will rise. Whoa. So don't you ever
Let me down again.
cause I'm depending on you, so you better come through this time. Please hear my cry, and if I ever let you down, my friend, it was a misunderstanding. So if I took you for granted, then I promise from today I go jump like I never jump, wave like I never wave, wine like I never wine before, just to show you a sorrow, and I need you back in my life. Look at people by the truck, emotions running high, we end up in the sky, tears running down we high, can't you tell that we sorrow?
All right, we are back. Good afternoon, everyone. How are y'all? Well, from the chat in the room, I sense that energy is up. Everybody's ready for a packed afternoon session. Okay, well, it doesn't sound that way. Do we need some coffee? All right, well, we are going to run through the first part of this afternoon very quickly. We will start with a few presentations, a couple of them quite short, and then we get to the roundtable discussion. As you can see, we may be missing a couple people for our roundtable. We're not quite sure yet how many will be here, but we do have a few. One will join online. So after that, we go to another series of presentations followed by a question and answer segment. All right, so we will be calling on you to use those QR codes again, submit your questions using the online platform. All right, so to get us going this afternoon, we will hear from Ms. Nadita Ramachala, sorry. I think we're all here, everybody who's at this conference is probably very familiar with Nadita because she's been at the fore of a lot of the logistics and coordination of today's event and this week's event, from what I understand. Nadita is the manager at the Standardization Division at the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. Can we please welcome her?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So happy to have so many delegates here from all over the world with us at this ISO CC 309 meeting. My presentation today will be very short. I have 5 minutes, so I'll be speeding through. So I'll be talking about a subject that most of you all will be familiar with, and that is the national quality infrastructure. So next slide. Okay, as we all know, the national quality infrastructure has several different components. At the TTBS, we are responsible for standards development, so our primary role is the national standards body. But in order to have an effective governance framework, we know that there should be supporting systems such as conformity assessment, accreditation, metrology, technical regulations. And a key role for the utilization of these governance standards would be, one, how do we assess or ensure assurance and compliance to the standards? And this is done through conformity assessment. At TTBS, we have the responsibility for certifying both products and services. We also have the responsibility for metrology. And I should highlight, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a national quality policy, which was developed in 2018. And it looks at the critical components of stakeholder engagement. So we know that there are a number of participants within the quality infrastructure. We've heard a lot about stakeholder engagement, SMEs, and the impact of standards on SMEs. One of the critical challenges for SMEs being able to demonstrate compliance with standards and also being certified has come to the fore. And the use of standards and being able to demonstrate the benefits of these standards would be critical for Trinidad and Tobago over the extent of our quality policy. So we see that there are several different actors from NGOs to consumer organizations. Within our National Mirror Committee for Governance, we would have assembled a cross-section of stakeholders comprising many of the stakeholder categories that you're seeing on the screen right now. So the entire holistic approach to quality infrastructure is something that we have taken deeply on board within Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that there can be the application of standards within different industries and sectors. And as we know, the governance area is one that is transversal, it is cross-cutting, and we have taken the opportunity today to share best practices, and we'll hear a lot about integrated governance and dive deeper into that theme later on in the session. So, as we know, we've talked a lot about sustainable development and looking at the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and looking at prosperity, people, and planet. And without having a fully mature quality infrastructure, it would be very difficult to realize good governance. Even within the quality infrastructure itself, we're looking at making sure that our institutions within the QI are both robust, well-governed, and focus on sustainability. Within Trinidad and Tobago, our national quality policy has been endorsed by the Cabinet or our government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and it works in coherence with other policies that have been developed by the government. So, for example, climate change policies. There's a recent focus on energy efficiency. And today, as we know, there's a regional symposium on crime and looking at public health and violence. And those are some of the social aspects that have been underdeveloped within the Caribbean region in general. And it poses a challenge for the future generations, and it's something that we have to take on board. How do we deal with these social issues? We have the next generation. We have a lot of crime and violence in certain pockets of the country, and those are critical issues that we have to deal with. So just to talk about our national quality policy, It provides a significant focus on the quality culture. So right now, TTBS is engaged in a project to ensure that we build a robust quality culture. We speak about the theme of quality consciousness. So we recently launched our quality awards, and we are hoping to spread the application of standards across different sectors. We know that the quality infrastructure is imperative for sustainable development, achieving those sustainable development goals. And we also have our Vision 2030. I should highlight in our Vision 2030 document, which is the roadmap for the development of Trinidad and Tobago. There's significant focus on governance, so it is actually one of the main themes within that document. For the governance framework within the national quality policy itself, we have recently established and revitalized our National Quality Council to ensure that we have a broad spectrum of stakeholder interests represented on council. And as we heard, Ms. Deborah Sousa Okafabri is one of the members of the Quality Council and representing academia. The emphasis on higher education and educating young professionals is critical for the success of the quality infrastructure and ensuring good governance in general. We are also looking at developing an independent accreditation body for conformity assessment within TTBS itself. And there's overall project management support. So as we know, just to recap some of the benefits of the quality infrastructure, we have heard about the themes of trust, confidence. How do we demonstrate that we are operating sustainable businesses worldwide? It helps improve market access. And one of the topics that we would probably touch on later on in session is that a lot of countries, especially in Europe, are developing regulations that are focused on ESG. And now it becomes imperative for us as developing countries within the CARICOM region to be able to match those requirements and demonstrate that we are behaving ethically, sustainably, and minimizing wastage of resources. So that is I would say, beyond the normal quality management that we're accustomed to. We are now looking at more strict requirements and regulations for ESG that we may have a challenge in achieving over time, but if we do not put it on the agenda, then how do we help our local producers and service providers to demonstrate good governance and ensure that we are operating ethically, demonstrating proper accountability within operations, ensuring that we can meet these disclosure requirements, minimizing waste, energy efficiency. We've had a lot of discourse around electric vehicles within Trinidad and Tobago. So those are some of the new topics, or how to ensure that products are biodegradable. So we have a lot of standards, and for us, the national quality infrastructure presents those tools that enable producers, service providers to demonstrate that they comply with the requirements of standards, as well as our trade policies for the country. We need to be able to demonstrate confidence within our products, ensure that they meet safety, environmental, health and safety requirements. And this is part of the whole holistic approach to having good governance. And we need to ensure that our institutions are also well governed in order to ensure that they deliver benefits to the society. So regional competitiveness is something that we also have been looking at, and there are some very focused programs that the Ministry of Trade and Industry, as well as the TTBS, has been embarking on to ensure that we can support our SMEs. So, for example, dealing with our small, medium-sized enterprises within the country is critical for us. And that is the end of my very brief presentation. I think that we set in the background and the context of the national quality infrastructure is very important to link to the theme of integrated governance and how do we build systems that are well governed in order to serve the society. So the result of this is not for, say, an NSB or individual company, but the society and the consumers and the end users that we serve. So on that note, I would like to thank you all for your attention and turn the session back to Ardeen to continue with the rest of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadita. You know, it's no small feat to ensure you keep people awake after lunch. So well done. I want to invite Mike Hennigan to return to the podium. He will be addressing us again as committee manager of ISO TC 309.
So now I can guarantee you some sleep now. Obviously lots of familiar faces and a few not so familiar faces, but really to summarize the work that we're doing, the committee membership, as I think we mentioned in the previous session, you know, we've got 80 members of 80 of 167, I think it is, ISO members who are involved in the committee, either as participating members or observer members. We've got a lot of what we call internal liaisons with other technical committees, so with the Quality Committee, Environmental Management, Risk Management, Occupational Health and Safety Management, Sustainable Finance. There's a long list in there. So we try and sort of coordinate with those other committees to make sure that, you know, we're sort of following each other's work and from the point of view of the outside world, you know, we want to sort of give one ISO view on things, or at least, you know, try not to have too many different definitions of terminology across the committee. So we try and liaise with them. I mean, it's difficult enough within the TC, but we at least try with other committees as well. We've got a number of liaisons with external organisations. You know, quite a variety, but there's, you know, for example, there's the Association of Corporate Investigators, the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, International Corporate Governance Network, the International Integrated Reporting Council. There are a couple of other institutions, other sort of NGO type organisations, like the Organisation of American States, OECD. And then we've also got Transparency International are involved with our work as well, so they get the opportunity to see what we're doing and to you know, input at various stages of our processes and provide expertise as well, according to what their resources are. We've got quite a busy portfolio, and I'm just wondering with the slides, I may have actually sent the wrong slide deck. But I think the important thing is we have got a lot of work on. Do you want to scroll through to the next slide? Yeah, I think I do apologise. I've sent you the lots of highlighted numbers and things. So don't worry about that. Actually, that will do. That's not bad. The overview of projects if you're looking at it online. But we have a lot of work on. We've published 37,001, the Anti-Bribery Management System Standards. That was in 2016 under a different committee, but we brought that into 309. 2021 was a very busy year with 37,000. We had the Whistleblowing Management System Standard and we had the Compliance Management System Standard. We also developed a couple of competence requirement standards for the people who work on compliance and anti-bribery, so we did those in conjunction with ISO Casco. We've got quite a few under development now. We've got the governance maturity model, which has been approved at the draft international stage, and it's in the final stages before publication. So there'll be a final draft for editorial comments that will go out very shortly. We've got 37,005 and 37,006 in Working Group 1 on the indicators. We've got standards on internal investigations, conflicts of interest, fraud control management systems. So, you know, there's a lot going on with that sort of group of standards, and then we've got the 2 new compliance management standards on evaluation of effectiveness and the guidelines for competence management and personnel development. We've currently got a ballot on a proposal for guidance for the prevention, identification and response to human trafficking, forced labour and modern slavery. So, you know, that's going to be, if approved, that's another work stream. And we've also recently approved the preliminary work item, so it's still at very, very early stages on general principles for ESG disclosure. So that's been approved. It's kind of there as a flag in the ground, but there's a lot of work still to be done on that, and we'll be working with our colleagues from China who made that original proposal, but also with the ESG coordinating committee, because that's going to be a sort of fundamental a standard that's sort of fundamental to the whole ESG approach in ISO. So I think the overview of projects, that's actually last year's one. I've got a nice shiny new one that was on the proper slide deck. But it just shows, you know, we're a very busy committee with a lot of projects, and you know, takes a lot of work from our experts and from the leadership of the different working groups. So yeah, that's really the big overview of our work, and obviously we'll go through a lot of that in more detail on Friday in the formal session, where you know, if members have queries about the process and progress, then they can ask about that and explain what's happening in detail on those. Hopefully I'm in time. Yeah. Yeah. So that's apologies about the slides as well. That's done in haste, repenting at leisure. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. And now for our final presentation before we get to the roundtable, we hear from Dr. Axel Kravatsky. Do I need to introduce you again, Axel? No. All right, Axel is going to present the strategic business plan for ISO TC 309.
Great, thank you very much. Good afternoon. So I'm going to speak in three segments. One long one, one short one. Not long. I've written down the words to keep it contained. And then just a little bit more detail on the strategic business plan itself, but again, on a highlight, just emphasizing a couple of other aspects. So the first thing is what are some of the main themes that we have observed when reviewing the whole landscape of organizational governance? And I'm going to highlight only 7. There were a couple of more, but the first one it's a kind of an obvious one, but it's an important one, because at this point in time, the world has agreed on the principles of good governance. We couldn't have said that 5 years ago, and now that is almost taken for granted. Yes, it is. There's more work to be done. So in 2016, TC 309 was established to create an international consensus on good governance, on good organizational governance, applicable to all organizations, countries, and sectors. And then with the release of ISO 37000 in 2021, TC 309 provided the foundational standard for organizational governance. More work and more integration is needed. This work is essential as organizations face profound changes in their types, the needs, driven by societal shifts, public expectations, and technology. The outputs of TC 309 aim to enhance the organization's ability to achieve their strategic objectives while increasing trust and reducing risk. As we continue to develop new standards, our focus remains on enabling organizations to adapt to an ever-changing world, embracing transparency, integrity, and ethical behavior to deliver long-term value. In recent years, This was the good governance. In recent years, we have also seen environmental, social, and governance factors, ESG, become essential in evaluating on organizations' financial performance. ESG disclosures are consolidating towards global standardization with International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, EFRAG, the Task Force on Climate and Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD and TNFD, amongst the most influential standards. As ESG disclosures requirements grow, organizations must adapt by developing integrated governance frameworks and practices, such as those enabled by ISO TC309. Organizational governance now involves managing and communicating large amounts of ESG data, which can improve decision-making when managed effectively. Performance evaluations are increasingly based on integrated value generation models that consider more than just financial returns. The role of ISO standards, particularly those of ISO TC309, is to help organizations develop governance frameworks to meet the evolving legal, regulatory, and voluntary compliance expectations. This includes management system standards for compliance, whistleblowing, anti-bribery, amongst others. A third trend that we have observed in recent years in corporate governance has been a shift in focus towards purpose, sustainability, and integrated approaches. Organizational purpose is now central to governance, with debates surrounding the ultimate value generated by businesses. Policy-level focus has led to the introduction of regulations and legislation that encourages organizations to identify their impact on stakeholders, society, and the environment. The expectation of organizations to sustain and regenerate social and natural capital has become mainstream. Consolidation and interoperability of regulations, digitization of reporting, mandatory auditing of disclosures are characteristics of the current period. Additionally, the responsibilities of governing bodies now extend across the entire value chain. As a result, ethics, value generation, risk, compliance, and accountability have become central to governance methods. Governing bodies must re-examine the value they create and ensure oversight processes are proportionate to the risks faced by the organization. Disclosure, consultation, and accountability mechanisms are also expected to play increasing roles in the future. The fourth theme is integration. Integration is a central theme in ISO 37000, which introduces integrated governance and the integrated value generation model. This concept aligns organizations with the societal interests, promoting sustainable development while avoiding harm to social and natural capitals. Integrated governance enables organizations to achieve essential sustainable development indicators, generating higher levels of positive outcomes, sustainable use of resources, and an efficient value generation process. So therefore, integrated governance covers three dimensions: the ultimate value generated to fulfill the organizational purpose, conservation or regeneration of the resource base, and third, optimization of governance and management processes that incorporate all governing groups and contributors, ensuring complementarity of functions. This includes governing bodies, stakeholders, managerial functions, such as risk management and compliance. So integrated governance systems utilize frameworks that enable effective collaboration among governing groups and management functions. ISO TC309 has and will continue to establish international consensus on integrated governance principles and practices, facilitating the strengthening of organizational culture, resilience, and value generation to advance sustainable development. All this happens in a context of greater uncertainty and therefore risk. The fifth trend is about the era of uncertainty, governance and risk. Risk and compliance, so GRC. GRC has become even more crucial in governance frameworks as organizations face unprecedented crises related to greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, pollution, inequality, and other challenges. The risk universe is growing with new domains such as environmental, social, governance factors emerging alongside traditional risks like political instability, war, pandemics, supply chain disruptions. Effective governance frameworks include robust internal control systems, risk management and compliance, assurance and audit capabilities. The evolving regulatory environment and policy developments necessitate strong organizational resilience and detailed standards for compliance and ethics. ISO 37000 has introduced guidelines on internal control system, but further guidance is required to promote the adoption across the various sectors. So integrated governance is essential, combining robust governance with risk and compliance domains to ensure a reliable ESG response. Practical guidance is needed on how to develop effective integrated governance frameworks across all types of organizations, encompassing purpose, value, culture, diversity, and stakeholder perspectives. So collaboration and liaison work are vital for the success of TC 309, with a focus on the desired outcomes and potential collaborations with other critical technical committees, external liaison organizations. Continued engagement across organizational ISO committees, such as the Climate Change Coordinating Committee and the newly established ESG Coordinating Committee, are, as mentioned previously, important. Two more trends. The sixth trend concerns stakeholders. Stakeholder engagement is increasingly central to organizational governance, as highlighted by the 37,000 principles. The value of organization now extends beyond financial returns, with non-financial dimensions of value becoming ever more prevalent. Intangible assets are growing in importance, making stakeholder relations more complex. A global trend sees stakeholders adopting a broader, integrated view of organizations with an increasing focus on ESG performance. Shareholders, particularly institutional investors, are becoming more active in governance, driving governing bodies to become aware of and responsive to stakeholders' expectations. And finally, the most important of developments is the urgency of sustainable development. It is increasingly recognized in political, policy, and business circles due to the climate emergency, and it is short, medium, and long-term effects. ISO has committed to considering climate science in all new revised international standards, developing an action plan and promoting inclusivity. It is crucial to have good governance, trust and innovation, collaboration across organizations, sectors, and countries to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. TC 309 focuses on governance and directly commits to the SDGs 3, 8, 9, 11, 12, and 16, which encompass well-being, economic growth, infrastructure, sustainable cities, responsible consumption, and strong institutions. Indirectly, through the liaison with other TC, it also contributes to all SDGs, except, is not in focus yet, but it shall be, SDG 17, which is partnerships for the goals. So, a successful development agenda, inclusive of partnerships at all levels and strong international cooperation, are therefore essential. Having identified these 7 main themes in trends, I will briefly touch on the value propositions because we have reviewed them before. So the aim, therefore, is for the ultimate value that TC 309 contributes is governance that enables sustainable development, responding to the trends as outlined. In choosing and guiding the development of new deliverables by the TC, we're going to be guided by the 6 principles or strategic value propositions that we have reviewed this morning already. So I will now take just a little bit more to look at the strategy in a little bit more detail. I'm not going to review all the topics. I'll just give you a second view on number 2. So a more detailed view of a one-page view of what the strategy entails. So these parts we have reviewed before. So we have the overall purpose, which is to generate a world that is safer, better, and easier. And we are contributing integrated governance for sustainable development in that regard. The outcomes are that standards are used, that we are recognized as the leader in the domain, that our work is timely, that it meets the needs, and that it is inclusive. The measures, well, they're going to come later. The measures, I have measures as well, I'll talk about them. But so you can see now a little bit more detail in the different dimensions related to our work. And I had highlighted some of the key products, like, for example, the case studies and the tools that enable organizations to look at integrated solutions for their needs. And together, this work will result in, I can't read my thing from here. Actually, I have it here. Together, that results, so you will know that if we are successful or not, if you actually have resource materials, if there are actual requests and references of our material, and if our material is accessible as possible by all relevant parties. The second dimension has to do with meeting critical global needs, and that means that we need to be able to recognize the needs as soon as they arise, categorize them in terms of urgency, and respond to them. And that means also that we are then able to fill the gaps, and as I emphasized this morning, is about emphasizing assessments, conformity assessments, so developing requirements, standards, and specifications that allow organizations to assess themselves and be assessed about the progress, because that too increases trust, and there is a clear trend in that direction. The result of that is to have time to market. So from the time that we recognize a trend, how quickly do you have a deliverable? What are the named trends, and can you map them, and can you use them in the work of standardization? Are gaps actually closed, and are there more conformance assessments possible? Finally, we have about the inclusiveness, ensuring that all voices are heard, because we are in a world together, and unless we develop standards and unless we develop solutions that consider all perspectives, we will not have the effectiveness nor the efficiency of the solution that we seek. So therefore, we build capacity and we purposefully seek diversity and inclusivity. And that leads us then to have a broader team of experts. Finally, all of this done is only through experts, so we are purposely building a strong foundation of resources in our expert pool and are enhancing the processes and structures within the TC so as to be able to scale up and speed up the delivery, the generation of value. I won't go there. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Axel. And so that brings us to the end of that set of presentations. We go now to our roundtable discussion, and that will examine best practices on regulatory frameworks for governance. And the presentations were meant to be largely Trinidad and Tobago focused. Well, the discussion, in fact, is meant to be that way, but we do have Bart Markovich sort of sitting in for someone who won't be on the panel after all. So it'll be a little more global, I think, in perspective, which is never a bad thing. So we'll start off this afternoon's roundtable with the chairman of the Integrity Commission of this country, Professor Rajendra Ramlogan. Professor, you're invited to come up here to deliver your presentation, and then we'll hear from Mr. Kameho.
Good afternoon. I was hoping I would not have to come up here, but I do. I only see one familiar face, that's Mr. Dupre, who was my senior at Trintoc so many years ago, maybe over 25 years ago, but that will age us, so I won't go there. You all are familiar, well, if you're not, most people will not be familiar with the Integrity Commission of Trinidad and Tobago. You would have heard about it, but know nothing about it. And that's not surprising because its record is very dubious in terms of its accomplishments. We are supposed to be the regulator for a certain body of persons in Trinidad and Tobago. Persons in public life falls under the jurisdiction of the Integrity Commission. These are members of parliament, government ministers, board of directors of state enterprises, state entities, they all are persons in public life. Underneath these persons would be chief technical officers of the government, permanent secretaries, etc. It's about 1,200 persons in all. And the jurisdiction over persons in public life extends to ensuring that they file these declarations every year, which sets out their assets, their liabilities, their income, and so on. And if any one of you require to file that declaration, you would know that it might be considered a painful exercise. So it should tell you from the start how painful it would be to have, standards that deal with governance and so on. If you find it painful to even file a simple declaration with your assets and liabilities, etc. From 2003 to 2019, over 5,000 declarations were not filed. It became the norm so that people did not recognize this requirement anymore. In 2021, I assumed the chairmanship of the 17th Commission, and it was decided that we would enforce the law. The result was in 2022, we obtained over 3,000 ex parte court orders with respect to persons in public life who did not file a declaration. From 2003 to 2019, the Commission had obtained 54. So it tells you the dramatic difference in what was being done. And this took place with a reduced budget from 26 million in 2015 to when I took office of 8.6 million. It has been done. We have been abused foully by many people, including very prominent persons who, when you go to serve them with these ex parte orders, they are very unhappy to be served. And I think that's all what gave rise to the feeling that the Integrity Commission is really not, a serious entity. In January this year, we published a list of 572 persons who we intend to file ex parte action with respect to, and we have started already. By June this year, we'd have no one who would not have been subject to an ex parte action or not filed from 2014 to 2021. So progress has been made in that area, and that's the more, I would call the more nuisance function that we engage in. But the second function is really investigations. We have been charged with regulatory responsibility to ensure integrity in public life. Public life integrity. So all persons in public life falls under the jurisdiction of the Commission. We can also assess their sense of integrity. But there's another category called persons exercising public functions. This category of persons, they are not required to file any declarations and so on. But we have jurisdiction over them in terms of investigating complaints with poor governance practices and so on. And these persons would be basically every single civil servant. But the main problem is, it's not the civil servant, it would be companies. The trend in Trinidad and Tobago is there are lots of state enterprises, state-private companies, Paria, Heritage, not picking on them, but these are all privately incorporated companies, meaning incorporated under the Companies Act of Trinidad and Tobago. If a state entity is incorporated under the the Companies Act of Trinidad and Tobago, we have no jurisdiction over employees other than the directors, because the directors are persons in public life. So, underneath that, management, no jurisdiction. If you are a state entity incorporated by an act of parliament, we have jurisdiction, except that that entity must be proclaimed as such by the president. I can assure you a very small percentage of that company has been proclaimed by the president. National Lottery Control Board is one of that comes to mind fairly quickly, but WASA, TNTech, all these entities are outside our jurisdiction in terms of management. We only can exercise jurisdiction with respect to the directors, but if anything falls under directors, we have no jurisdiction. So a lot of people complain about, WASA, TNTech, and all these entities not realizing and feel that the commission is not doing anything. We don't have jurisdiction. Pure and simple. But the question of jurisdiction now is, how do we investigate these complaints and so on? We would love to see companies engage in certain, embrace good governance and so on, follow guidelines of integrity and so on. The problem is this. We also have our own ISO. We have our own ISO in the Integrity in Public Life Act. It's called our Code of Conduct. There's a code of conduct that deals with everything, a lot of stuff, conflict of interest, acceptance of gifts, inefficient and ineffective use of public resources, all those things are there. What is the problem with that wonderful thing? That I remember in the first week when I assumed the office, I had a meeting and I said, something troubles me. The Integrity Commission has been here for almost 20 years. There have only been one prosecution for corruption, and that was unsuccessful, which is with respect to Mr. Basir Pandey. So there are only three conclusions I could draw. The act is bad, the investigation is bad, or there's no corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. Take your pick. That did not make me popular, made its way in the newspaper. Anyway, that's the next story. But nevertheless, there is a sense of cynicism, because when you read this code of conduct, it's a wonderfully written document. But the investigators who were there for many, many years, they said, but what is the sense of investigating? Spending an enormous amount of resources, man-hour, and time, generating thousands of pages of investigative reports when there are no penalties attached to breach of this code of conduct. Nothing. You can breach it. We might send you a letter. You smile, and that's the end of the story. So there's a feeling after 20 years we are wasting our time. So, so these standards, with all due respect to my host, sounds very good. If it's voluntary, I wish you luck. I'm not confident that maybe I might come here 20 years and hear the same story, but I wish you luck. It is good, but I think the Western culture of law is that without penalties, laws really don't work. We have submitted for the last 2 years repeated amendments to the IPLA asking the government to consider adding sanctions to our code of conduct. It's hardly surprising we have not received a response. And that's not just this government. I believe that since the tenure of Mr. Ken Gordon back in 2013, these things have been making its way there too. So basically, we might be asking persons who may run afoul of these provisions to impose penalties on themselves, which is quite an uphill battle. So the commission has been, yes, we've been trying our best. An interesting thing also with the commission is, apart from the code of conduct, which is our main platform, we have jurisdiction over the prevention of, pardon me? Right, I have to stop. So let me stop with just one thing I would just like to stop with and say that, we really need to look deep within to decide the society we want and how much does integrity really mean, except to have these nice little functions, and whether we really are serious about the hard work and lobbying for the type of regulations that would impact positively on the development of Trinidad. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramlogan. I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to delve deeper during the discussion. We now invite the representative of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Gregory Camejo. He's the Senior Manager, Corporate Strategic and Project Services.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. All right, so just to give an overview of the Central Bank, as you know, we have two major rules, which would be financial stability and monetary policy. In 2021, we developed a strategic plan ranging from 2021 to 26, where we would have addressed several issues in the monetary space. We wanted to modernize monetary policy. That's one of, so we have 3 themes, 9 objectives, and out of those objectives, we have 20 strategic plans. Out of the monetary policy framework, one of the projects that came about was project number 6. And project 6 regards to integrate environmental issues and climate change into policy considerations. What are we trying to achieve with this? We want to play an active role in network for greening in the financial system. We want to collaborate with local and financial institutions and other agencies on assessing environmental climate change developments and relevant financial measures. And internally, we felt we wanted to calculate our own carbon footprint and determine appropriate changes. We are now in year 2 of this project. We are on the way of measuring our own carbon footprint. It is one of our goals would be to do some stress testing in developing some greening in the financial system, but that is now being developed as a conceptual framework. The other area of interest would be financial stability. And out of our financial stability goals really is to create a vigilant financial system. What we would find is that we would have developed over the years, since 2007, we developed a corporate governance framework or guidelines for the financial sector, and we would have updated it over the years. We did our most recent update in 2021. Now, these guidelines would have been the traditional board structures. It would have spoken to the values of the board, the role of the board, and different requirements. One of the things that will happen is that if we find we are able to audit in banks, and we can question their licensing if we find them in breach of some of these guidelines. We also have a fit and proper guideline, and we also do something called a market conduct guideline, which would speak to how financial institutions interact with their customers. So the bank has been committed to good governance. The bank is now involved in looking at environmental sustainability. We walk in the walk by starting with ourselves first, looking at our internal structure, and then we hope to partner with the sector in developing sustainable measures for green economies and green banking. We've started to look at things like green bonds and the impact of green bonds, participating in that. So the banking sector is looking at green bonds and sustainability of such. So we are on the way, and we hope to partner with organizations so that we can be more vigilant in this sector and also modernize our monetary policy to capture some of these sustainable issues. All right, so thanks.
Thanks, Gregory. We now have our most recent addition to the panel. We have Professor Dr. Bart Makovich, and he joins us from the Viadrina Compliance Center, a European university in Viadrina in Germany. So, Bart, you are welcome now to present.
Thank you very much. I would like only just to add very quickly, I'm representing officially the German Standardization Institute, the DIN. And on behalf of DIN, I am here and I am very happy to be with you because as you can see on my haircut, my hair are gray. And as I started working with TC 309, they were not gray. They became gray. So as you can see, I've been with TC, and actually it was at the beginning still a PC, a project committee, if I'm not wrong. At the very beginning, I think we started around 10 years ago or something, I guess so. Yeah, so a couple of years ago, and the very starting point was actually the standard ISO 19600 and compliance management system, and now we are at the point that we are been developing here the whole structure for governance and different management systems. So I was really happy and delighted as I got the message from Axel yesterday. It was about 10 p.m. So I was struggling with my jet lag, trying to not to fall asleep in this direction. That I am very spontaneously invited to be one of the panelists with the focus on Trinidad and Tobago. So I am really very happy that after having spent whole 3 days on Tobago, which is actually the fact, I was qualified to speak on this panel. I was actually thinking, and I think this is what we have very much in common. I think, I mean by we, me, myself, and you beautiful and friendly people living in Trinidad and Tobago, that we love music. And as Axel asked me if I'm going to accept the invitation, the first song I was thinking about was The Clash. You know that one? Should I stay or should I go? Because this is, of course, kind of my focus as well, governance, but I have to be honest, no idea what is the regulatory framework in Trinidad and Tobago. So this is kind of challenging, but he promised me it will be only 5 minutes, and as you can see, I've been talking already for 3 minutes. And after 3 minutes, I will get to the point now. And actually, the second song I was thinking about was the Beatles' Let It Be. So this is why I'm here. And I think it's a quite interesting subject of the panel. What is inspiring me very much was taken from the Hamlet, because I think the most important question is in this edition maybe not to be or not to be, but to regulate or not to regulate, because I think these are the two main ways we can think about when we are talking about governance frameworks. There are countries all over the world where we have hard law for governance with particular rules, principles, structures, and so on, and there are other countries, and one of those countries is Germany as well, that I am been living in and representing, where the legislator decided only to regulate governance in a certain aspect, which is we have in a German Stock Corporation Act the regulation that companies noticed at the German Stock Exchange are obliged to report on the governance. But we don't have the particular regulation requirements stated in a legally binding act. We have the so-called German Corporate Governance Code, where the name of the act is misleading, because this is a kind of code, but it's not legally binding. This is only a framework of recommendations on a kind of voluntary basis, laying down upon the model of comply or explain. So, what is, I think, and could be, if this is best practice, I'm not really sure, but this is something I wanted to present you as one of the examples, one of the ways in the big question, regulate or not to regulate. What is the advantage of this way is that companies are being given in this situation a huge flexibility. They have some recommendations, but they can implement the recommendations on the basis, or maybe not on the basis, but adjusted to the complexity, to the structure, and to the risk portfolio of the given company. So I think this is a kind of good side of this way. And what is also quite interesting is that the German Corporate Governance Code is a very similar one to the ISO 31000, Governance of Organizations, which is also principle-driven standard. So similar to the principles we have elaborated in the 31000 standard, we have in the German code also several principles. And I would like to touch upon some of them, not all of them, just to try to build a bridge to the integrated approach that we have been talking a lot so far, and that is outlined also in the strategic business plan of the TC 309, which I am the big enthusiast of as well. So we have among the principles, number one, of course, accountability and responsibility. Then we have something about the strategy, that's the second principle, and I'm aware that I have to come to an end probably. We have, which is really very, very interesting and connected with the very complicated German history on that, the inclusion of women, which is the third principle, especially in regard to the board of directors, the composition of the board of directors, and the top management. We have principle 4, and that could be maybe the best example to show you that what we have in this code is also an integrated approach. The fourth principle is internal control and risk management, and the fifth one is compliance, including whistleblowing. And that's it. We only have the principles with maybe a few sentences of explanations, but the legislator is not telling the companies how they have to implement it, how do they have to organize the system, the management system, and to implement it in an effective way, so that many companies in Germany used to look at available standards. And for example, when it comes to the implementation of a compliance management system, or recently whistleblowing management system, we have, for example, excellent ISO standards for that. So that creates a kind of a mosaic. We have a core code, which is even not legally binding, and then we have these principles and recommendations, and when it comes to the business that we have to implement it in practice, we can use any standard we like. So concluding this short presentation, I think the way of soft law with strong enforcement, and enforcement not by penalties, but by transparency, which means the reporting, so that companies are obliged to report on an annual basis about governance, anti-corruption measures, human rights protections, and all that stuff. And on the basis of the reports, the authority can conduct controls. If it turns out that the system is not sufficient or not effective, there could be a possibility of the so-called monitorship, so kind of education measurements, so that the authority together with the company can work out a plan how to make the system even better. So this is one of the options. I don't know if that would work in any country of the world. There are differences in our different countries and different approaches, but by that I was hoping to bring you a little bit closer one of the possible way how it could work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think that was very helpful, given the context in which we are speaking right now. And our final presenter for this panel, for this roundtable, actually joins us online. She is Ms. Carolyn Chalmers. She's the CEO of the ESG Exchange and Good Governance Academy. Carolyn, are you there? Carolyn, can you hear us? Yes, she's connecting. Okay. All right. So For those who may have questions already, for presenters who've already gone, feel free to share those via the online platform. You can scan the QR code if you hadn't already done that and share your questions there. We will be coming to them a little bit later on in this afternoon session. But we
I
do
am
have...
here now.
Okay, great. We're not seeing you,
Good.
though. Are we going to see her? Okay. So, Carolyn, okay, great. We see you. All right,
Good.
so over to you.
Thank you very much. I really loved what the previous speakers had to say, and especially discussing the compliance approach to governance versus an outcomes-based and apply approach to governance. It's interesting that we in TC 309 have both the compliance standard and the governance standard together because they are quite different. The ISO 37000 approach is one of an application of principles and really assessing governance outcomes. If I can be so bold and a bit controversial to say, do we really need to know how an organization is governed, or really are we more interested in the results of that governance? We want organizations certainly to behave ethically. We want organizations to perform well according to how they've set their targets. And we want organizations to steward their resources, and that's not only financial resources, but let's think about the 6 capitals, all their resources responsibly. And those are the 3 governance outcomes that we have in ISO 37000. Those governance outcomes can be achieved, says the standard, if the governing body, achieved by the organization, if the governing body is applying the principles in ISO 37000. So in terms of a compliance approach, do we have to have a governing body that brings in independence? Do we have to have a governing body that is has an audit committee? Do we have to have a governing body that brings in, discusses remuneration as part of its deliberations? I'm not sure we need to understand all of those details, but certainly as a society, we need to know that this organization is behaving ethically, is performing well, and is stewarding its resources and the world's resources as a result responsibly. So I think we have a different approach. I'm just giving the other side of the spectrum, the really radical other side, as opposed to a compliance, more of a tick box approach. I think that's something that's being debated around the world, is exactly what is this outcomes-based governance. It is fairly new. It's really was introduced in the South African Code of King IV as a governance outcomes-based approach in 2016. So it is fairly new, although the application of principles has been around for quite a few years now in the governance side of things. So the application of principles to Bart's approach is saying that we don't really need to know the details. Explain to us, and we're not prescribing how you're going to apply those principles, but explain to us how you're applying those principles. We're not going to prescribe it. And really that comes to the consideration of, can we say, proportionality. It's really the concept of what applies for your organization doesn't apply for every organization. We think about your organization's size, its type, its industry, its jurisdiction, and the laws associated with that. So really we can recognize that what the governing body does in applying those principles really needs to be different to its specific set of circumstances. So we can't be prescriptive in terms of how every organization should be practicing good governance and applying good governance principles through practices. So then going back to the principles we have seen in 37,000, that we can agree globally to a set of good governance principles. And those set of good governance principles are really around an organization doing its best. Compliance is about an organization doing what it must do, but it's not good enough to only do what you must do, because we know that often that legislation lags as the environment changes. We just saw that in many instances. Think about cybersecurity. We're seeing it now with artificial intelligence. So we know that our legislative frameworks do lag slightly. So we do want our organizations to not only be a minimum compliant, but also to do their best, which is more than a minimum. In the beginning, I remember the debates that we had in TC 309 at Quebec City around it's not compliance, it's not just compliance. So we settled on governance is not just compliance, but it does involve compliance. It does need to ensure that compliance is in place, but more than that, we need to know that the organization and the governing body of the organization are doing their best. So ISO 37000 really is about setting that, doing your best. And doing your best is applying those 11 principles that we have in ISO 37000. So I've been working with now 4 countries around the world, trying to look at establishing a standard, and now more recently a continental association of stock exchanges, really trying to set a standard for governance of organizations, knowing that, you know, as we spoke sustainability and governance and ESG, it is the G in ESG. It is the deciding factor in terms of how an organization is going to behave, is the governance of the organization and the decision-making by the governing body. So it's very important that we look at the governance of an organization. And then when it comes to stock exchanges, having a look at a standardized approach so we can bring in comparability across the various different stock exchanges. We know that we've got multiple dual listings and multi-listings around the world. So bringing in a governance regulation of a listing requirement would be appropriate to bring that comparability. So what do we use? Well, we have got an international standard now, which we didn't have before. So using ISO 37000 as the basis on which to build a stock exchanges, a listing regulation, and even a national code is something that we are busy looking at, and we're actually busy implementing now in several cases. That brings to us the ability to compare the governance of organizations, but we don't yet have the ability to do comparisons. We've got a standard, it's not certifiable, but soon in the work of the TC 309, in the work of the strategic business plan, we do want to get to comparability. We also want to look at an organization's governing body attempting to do better than it currently is, to find more optimal governance practices, to be able to communicate its governance stance and governance practices in a more appropriate way, in a more efficient way across an organization. And then to behave appropriately when it comes to adopting governance practices, to actually think about them and to not have the chief executive or the compliance officer fill out the reports for them just to tick it off, to actually get them to think about the principles, to adopt the principles, to understand them, to be able to apply them in their own minds. And those are levels of learning, really. So just to summarize, ISO 37000 has brought a global approach to, and a different approach to the way governance is practiced around the world. And that not necessarily a compliance-based approach. It certainly gives some guidance in what a compliance-based approach could be in terms of regulations, but really it's starting to swing the needle and shift the needle in terms of how are we assessing good governance? Is it that we're wanting to assess what the organization's board of directors is doing? Or do we really want to assess and ensure that the outcomes of what they do ensures an organization that is behaving ethically, performing well, and stewarding our resources, the world's resources and their own, stewarding those resources well? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. We invite you to stay online as we have time for a few questions before we move on. Professor Ramlogan, I'm keen to hear your reflections, having heard Carolyn and Bud and their contributions. Does that at all affect the way you perceive your own challenges in a Trinidad and Tobago context at the Integrity Commission?
Not really. What I can say is this. We have a very interesting provision in our act that says that we could advise and instruct entities in Trinidad and Tobago as to governance and so on. And I was just thinking on hearing all of this, it's like, you know, we had a recent instance where we had no jurisdiction over an entity where we felt there was some serious issue with governance. So we decided to exercise the power for the first time of advising and instructing. I'm not sure if they'll take on our instruction. But the question would be, what are we advising and instructing? Maybe if there are standards, we can advise and instruct them that there are these standards out there that you can comply with, that you can, you know, use those standards. Is it more powerful because we are now instructing you? So the instruction is not coming from the Bureau of Standards or volunteer, it's an instruction coming from a legislative, statutory power that is vested in us. So I thought that was quite an interesting, the whole notion of compliance, and we can actually get you to comply with those standards by virtue of our express power under our statutory law.
And you think that based on the extent of our challenges, that is the approach that is required? It is the more effective one, as opposed to maybe trying to get buy-in, or we have gone past that stage of trying to get buy-in.
You know, I think it was Thomas Hobbes who said that law without sanction is not law. Our culture, Western legal culture, is not about voluntary, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. I'm very familiar, for example, with Japanese law, and I know that in the Asian system, you can have compliance without sanction, as there's a feeling that if society has dictated that this should be what takes place, then why do we need to put sanctions? But in the Western world, in Trinidad and Tobago, even when there are laws, we don't obey it. So I don't see that as a likelihood.
All right, Gregory, we'll move to you in a very different context, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. And when you think about evolving regulatory frameworks in order to meet the requirements that come with climate change and sustainable development and sort of the mandates that come with those, do you think that it's essential to evolve the regulatory frameworks in order to meet those requirements? Can one happen without the other?
No, we would need the support of legislation. We would need support on something to enact our powers before we get to regulations. The central bank operates in a particular way. We respond to the regulations set in law. What we can do is we can provide some, and I think we are ways off because we need to understand when you talk about environment, the measurement, how you're going to measure, how you're going to regulate, what are the standards you're going to use, and whether that the financial sector, the sustainability of following those kinds of strategies. So we won't push it from that point of view, but if it becomes, based on the Paris Accord, a legal requirement that we follow certain guidelines, we will definitely fulfill that with the appropriate regulations.
Okay, and for Carolyn, with sustainable development and ESG becoming more critical in addressing climate, biodiversity loss, pollution, etc., how do banks and financial sector institutions more generally need to evolve their business models and governance? Now, this is specific to more of the financial sector. Is she there?
The financial sector is highly regulated. So I think most of the requirements are there. There has been lots of lessons learned in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and it's been highly regulated in terms of what needs to be done. There is still room to be able to innovate and continually improve. And I'm just looking at Barbara's comment on the online in terms of the compliance is a tick box exercise. I absolutely agree. It's not a tick box exercise. What I was really referring to is when you take an approach that's just, you need to have this in place, you need to have this in place, you need to have this in place. And then, yes, those things are in place, but there's no actual performance improvement. And I think the same is true. When you get in financial services, a highly regulated environment, really you need to be focusing more on the improvement of the performance as opposed to just achieving the minimum required.
And for Bart, you talked a lot, well, what you described sounded a lot to me and maybe to others like a situation where people have already bought into the system culturally, let's say. Is it that it was always that way, or did the needle move from what Carolyn described as a more compliance-oriented to it being more of an application process?
It hasn't been always like that, that's for sure. It's been a long process, and I would say two aspects played a very important role in that development. The first one were a couple of serious non-compliance cases we have had in a recent history that brought a huge education effect on other companies. Who understood that it's better to start before something will happen, which means not waiting for non-compliance, rather invest in robust compliance management systems, but also it applies not only to the compliance systems, also to the high level of governance as well. And the second one, which is I think also very interesting issue that hasn't been mentioned, I think, yet in a discussion, at least so far on this round table, are the so-called incentive models that we have had in different legislations all over the world, which is a kind of compromise that the legislator can offer. And I think this is quite a good solution, because by these incentive models, companies are not obliged to implement any particular management system, and especially compliance management system or whistleblowing management system or others. But in case of non-compliance, there is the possibility of the so-called compliance defense, which means that if a company will prove and deliver the evidence that they have done everything that was possible, that was state-of-the-art, in brackets, the ISO standard, because ISO standards are the state of the art. So they implemented a robust and effective compliance management system, and still it happened, the non-compliance happened. There will be a substantial reduction on sanctions in that situation, maybe connected to kind of a monitorship program, so that the company can be educated in a well way how to do the things better in the future. So I think that could be an idea. I don't know if you have this kind of incentive approaches in the legislation in Trinidad and Tobago, but we have had it in many countries already. This is a very recent development in European Union as well. For example, we don't have it in Germany, but we have the ruling of the highest federal court on that in the case of existence of a compliance management system, if a non-compliance case occurred, the amount of sanctions will be usually very much lower than in the case without compliance management system, which is another aspect, because I mentioned at the beginning, I would say there were two main aspects. The one of them were the serious non-compliance cases, and the other one is this incentive model. And I think what is also quite interesting when we are talking about current challenges and about the Z generation that is thinking in a completely different way, I am really always wondering when I'm having now my students in the classes that some of them, like born in 2002, 3 sometimes, they are having book or a newspaper for the first time in their hands. I have to explain them what is a book, that it consists of a cover and it's made of paper, and you can read, you can start even reading from the end and then go to the beginning and so on. This is a completely new generation, and what I want to say by that is that communication is a very crucial aspect as well. In all management systems, communication is a very basis for governance as well, and we have to understand the new generation as well. And the new generation, they are not anymore interested only in the product and the price, but also in the background of the company that produced the product. And I think that could be the third aspect. So incentive and these non-serious non-compliance cases. And the third aspect is that the population, the people all over the world, we are changing. We are constantly changing, and now very quickly. And I'm even not touching upon the artificial intelligence and ChatGPT that I'm really crazy development. But we are changing, and there is a pressure from the society, from people, on companies to make this change as well. So I think maybe even in some circumstances, even a higher pressure that any other legal act could have.
And that AI question actually came up earlier, but we didn't get to it, so hopefully we will later this afternoon. Just to wrap up this roundtable, how do you all envision ISO and TTBS synergizing efforts to work with efforts along with your organizations to improve the challenges we're talking about, particularly Professor Ramlogan and Gregory?
I'll follow.
Well, I mean, I do see organizations adopting it, particularly in areas that we don't directly, the non-banks areas, insurance companies, eventually, although we don't regulate them, credit unions. I could see some of those non-bank financial institutions really adopting some of these standards, because they don't right now have the legislation to have some of the governance principles there yet. So, and of course, we would support any improvement in governance and governance standards, because that's primarily our business, is to make sure that, you know, people continue to operate in a way that promotes and keeps financial stability. So for us, we see it as something that there could be synergies, and we're hopeful that as it develops, it makes our job easier, because people would have adopted best practice.
Professor?
Well, especially as I mentioned earlier, we are dealing with, I think it's interesting because we are dealing with a situation where we can advise companies on certain guidelines, but we have not generated any ourselves. So obviously there's room there for this synergy. My one fear continues to be that we have guidelines already which are voluntary and not being complied with. And now to tell entities, well, there's these other guidelines that are also voluntary. I'm not sure. 2 sets of voluntary that are not being complied with, where that takes us.
All right, so I think this is something we'll definitely follow up in the Q&A session that will follow the next round of presentations. Thank you to all of our panelists. We will now invite online Dr. Jean-Pierre Meilhan, who is the convener of Working Group 2, ISO TC 309, to deliver his presentation, which is a case study on ISO 37001. Yes. Not 7,000. Anti-bribery management systems. Is he there? Okay.
I am there, yes, and I'm going to share my screen. Just a minute. So do you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So just as an introduction, so I'm representing online SNV, the Swiss national standard body. I'm sitting in Geneva now. I smiled at when Bartos said that he had gray hair from the time that he started to work on compliance. I started quite a few years ago, and actually I would like to have more hair than I have now, and to have the hair that I had 10 years ago. So we are now working on ISO 37001 on the renewal. You know that standards have to, after 5 years, have to go into a renewal process. So we are doing this for 37001. There will not be great changes. It's more alignment with other standard and so on. As to the what was said about enforcement, in ISO 37001, with dealing with anti-bribery, it is an issue, of course, where what Bart Markovich said before applies. I mean, there have been some very large corruption bribery cases that have given rise to huge penalties and other financial penalties. And so I remember when about 20 years ago, when we were thinking, well, you know, anti-bribery is not going to be successful if there are no cases, but then around 10, 12 years ago, the first cases have come, and now people are certainly taking notice of the risk of not having anti-bribery measures. This being said, I must say that this has been accompanied also by a change of attitude. So the business world has become more open to a culture of integrity, to not only to applying measures just to escape prosecution, but also because it's the right thing to do. I will give you, a short run through 37001. What it covers. It covers all forms of bribery, so that includes the bribery of public officials, civil servants. It includes the bribery also of private officials, that's of officers of private corporations. So this the private bribery is less. It's less well known that it's also something that calls for anti-bribery measures. It applies to passive or active bribery. Passive is the receiving of bribes by a public official, and active bribery is the giving of a bribe. It applies also to all kinds of organization, small, medium, and large. So I've personally been involved in auditing or advising some corporation with over 100,000 employees and others with less than 100 employees. And it also applies to public or private organization, to public administration, or to private corporations. I've also been involved in the auditing or advising of a public administration, of a city, also of a department the department of an organization. But the standard is used mostly for private corporations, really. The standard is risk-based, so the measures that have to be implemented to prevent and detect bribery depend on the risk of bribery. The main factors that influence how these measures are implemented is the size. For example, for the mode of communication in a very large organization is not the same as in a small one or small company. The location, that's relevant. I mean, the place where you are is relevant for the due diligence of business associates, how much due diligence you will apply. The sector of activity, for example, for training personnel, and the interaction with public officials, whether you have a frequent interaction, especially to obtain permits, licenses, etc. So again, to be a bit more specific, in a large organization, the communication will require an elaborate and detailed anti-bribery policy. So that's a document that may comprise 20 pages. Some are longer, but they are not necessarily better. But in a large organization, if you want to cover all aspects of the organization's business, you have to go into some depth. Then you'll have to translate the documentation in up to 30 languages, and you'll have to communicate via the intranet and the internet. Now, in a small firm, it can be much simpler. If you have for example, if you have 20 to 50 employees, maybe you can gather them all in a large room and discuss the anti-bribery policy, explain it to them. And what you really want to convey is the commitment not to pay bribes and not to use substitutes like gifts and entertainment. Also, hiring a distributor abroad to illustrate due diligence. If you hire a distributor abroad or maybe in your own country, I mean, it's a low-risk country. A low-risk country is a country ranking certainly under the first 10 in the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index, maybe also under the first 20 or the first 30, is still low risk. The due diligence can be limited to a media search, to a review of legal standing of the business and the business expertise. In a high-risk country, or maybe a country in the second half of the index, I think Trinidad and Tobago is still in the first half of the index, so it's not a very high-risk country. There you would have to go to implement in-depth due diligence with an on-site investigation by trained investigators. Interaction with public officials. One case that I have experienced myself, that was a harbor official who was requesting a bribe of $10 to stamp a document needed by a company in relation with the unloading of goods. So $10, that seems to be quite negligible. But then when looking a bit more in depth into this case, this $10, this event took place many, many times a day. So at the end of the year, the total paid by this company were $350,000, which of course is not acceptable. The anti-bribery management system scope, it can apply to the whole organization, a sole trader, even, a partnership, a charity, a foundation with a charitable goal, a firm, a corporation, a public administration or agency. Or it can also apply to part of an organization if it has its own functions to achieve its objectives, including finance, sales, marketing, and procurement, for example. To give you a case, I was auditing an agency that was an agency of the Department of Agriculture in a quite large country. This agency was developing new breeds of cattle, and also they were in a separate location on a mountain or on a slope or on a hill, completely separate from the rest of the department. There were about 120 people, I think, and about 40 or 50 cows. And they had a specific activity that nobody else in the Department of Agriculture had. They were specialized personnel dealing with the cattle and taking care of the cattle and of the breeding of different races to improve the local breed, and also they had their own budget. That had their own clientele. They were selling. Actually, they were selling embryos for abroad in the whole world. So the tools that are available in the text of the standard, first of all, the standards, unfortunately, have to be bought, have to be purchased, but that's because ISO finances. ISO is a private organization. It's a private association based here in Geneva. It does not have a big staff. All the work for ISO, the experts' work, like my involvement and the involvement of colleagues in TC 309, is either paid by the employers or by the person themselves. So the only resource that ISO has to finance itself is the sale of the standards. There is also a practical guide to ISO 37/2016. I was the editor of this guide. It gives some practical information on implementing the standard. These documents are available online from the online browsing factor of the TDBS. To implement the standard, I think that expert advice can be helpful, but I think it is important that the organization keeps the lead because the implementation should really reflect the culture of the organization that is implementing the standard. So I'll stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Jean-Pierre Mehan talking to us there, joining us online. And of course, Jean-Pierre, we ask you to stick around because we will have questions coming to all of you, the presenters, in this period after, at the very end, at the very last presentation. So up next, we hear from Dr. Bart Markovich once again. Yeah. Sure, you can come in. Yes. No, all right, in the meantime, we do have a question. So we can go to that for now and then come back to Bart. Okay, so this question comes from Chairman Dupre. The process of moving organizations to good or better governance often seems to result in an increase in red tape at an operational level. How is this undesirable side addressed in TC 309? And I'm not sure which of our presenters or panelists on stage or online might be in a position to assist with that. Maybe Axel, you can grab a mic and respond. All right, so I'm going to repeat the question, so maybe you can help. The process of moving organizations to good or better governance often seems to result in an increase in red tape at an operational level. How is this undesirable side addressed in TC 309?
Well, it may be so, but if you do it well, it wouldn't be so. So let me give you an example. So I was involved in helping lead a project throughout the Caribbean on business ethics. So we spent a lot of time with many organizations developing codes of ethics, trying to develop whistleblowing systems and so forth. If at that time we had the guidance contained in 3702 on whistleblowing that clearly lays out what is required of whom, then we would have saved a lot of time and spent a lot less time. Policies could be a lot shorter and a lot more focused. So I think a lot of the things that people are thinking is governance is actually not really governance. It is just something that people made up and it's a tradition. So I think it doesn't have to be so. It could be so, but it doesn't necessarily.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me continue with the 37002 standard, the whistleblowing management system. And as you can see here, I decided to find out this title of the presentation, ISO 37002, which is whistleblowing management system as a fundament of integrated governance. I think this is slightly different than it is on the agenda. Since it was important to me to pick up this point of integrated governance. And what I would like to point out, and I will skip some slides since I was asked to keep it short, like about 10 minutes, I would like only to point out in which way or what is the role that the whistleblowing is playing within the compliance management system and the compliance management system itself within the integrated governance approach. So this is what I will focus on in the next 10 minutes. But before I come to that, I would like to start with a short prologue, which is, I think, for all of us, it could be quite important just to see what is the overall importance of reporting on wrongdoings in organizations. And just to provide you some examples on that, I prepared a short case study, only 5 examples very quickly, from very different kind of organizations, because it doesn't matter if we are talking about companies, we are talking about, for example, hospital, or even churches. All of them are composed of several persons, human beings. They are creating risks, so their moral obligation is to find out what kind of risk they create and to address those risks in an appropriate way. So some examples of whistleblowing. This is the first one. Maybe some of you can find out what kind of example it is. That was a very famous whistleblowing case of, I would put, yeah? No, no, that was the mad cow disease. There was a a doctor in Germany who remarked suspicious behavior of cows, but that was ignored completely by the authorities. And at the end, that was the direct cause of the outbreak of the mad cow disease. The next case also happened in Germany regarding the residential care homes for elderly people. There was a care worker informing the public prosecutor about the mistreatment of the elderly people in those establishments, and the consequence of the information was the dismissal of the whistleblower, not the improvement of the conditions in the house, but the dismissal of the whistleblower. At the end, she had the success before the courts. Then the third case, one of many of them, we have many examples from the banking sector, which is the regulated sector, maybe because this is the only sector where there is a legal obligation to have a whistleblowing management system, including the whistleblowers protection. So maybe, who knows, maybe there are so many cases that are being disclosed. This one was very complicated, almost kind of a soap opera, a romance also within it. Because the person named Gustav Mollat, who noticed the non-compliance within his bank, involving his wife even. And in course of that, his wife, first he informed the authorities and so on, but his wife accuses him of rape and other crimes. So at the end, the reporting person, the Gustav Mollat, was forced into psychiatric clinic even, of all of those accusations, and it was he who was right at the end. So the story of his wife was not true, and at the end, all of Mollat's reports turned out to be true. That was from the banking sector. This one from the political sector that changed even slightly geopolitics all over the world was the Snowden affair, a very famous whistleblower about the NSA and the information from a former employee of this agency, large-scale intelligence practices in Europe and around the world. And then the last, also from the banking sector, the UBS scandal, and that was the first one, as to my knowledge, that was where the so-called Bounty Act in the United States applied, so that the whistleblower was rewarded a lot of money for disclosing this case. So the prologue is at the end, a very short study as promised. What does it teach us? First, whistleblowing is concerning all of us, all sectors, all kind of organizations, including it's very important to me to point it out. Even religious communities, even city halls, public administrations, governments, all kind of organizations. It can, and again, so far I am linking this short presentation to the ISO standard. This is the same approach we are making in the ISO standards. ISO standards are applicable to all kind of organizations. It's not about companies, it's about all kind of organizations. It can lead to the reduction or even exclusion of the organizational risk, and which is also very important, and this is one of the aims of the standard as well, it can be very dangerous to the reporting person itself. So what have all of these non-compliance cases in common? And I think this is a very important point. It doesn't matter if you are talking about corporation, local government, public health, hospitals, any kind of organizations. We are talking about rules, and this is the first aspect. We are talking about human beings, about people, and we are talking about the question why human beings are able, in particular situation, particular circumstances, to breach the rules. And this is something that our values and culture is the source of the answer on that question. So rules, people, and values. And this is actually could be the end of the presentation. All the standards we have been producing here, whether we are talking about governance or fulfilling the obligation, compliance, or disclosing misbehavior, which is whistleblowing and protecting person disclosing wrongdoing, is about rules, people, and behavior or misbehavior. So that, having said at the very beginning as a very short, brief introduction. Now, coming to the point, the standards we've been developing so far, we've been trying to sort them, to find kind of a structure, for sure we can divide them into two levels. The first one is the governance level, which is the highest one, and then underneath the governance we have the operational level, the management level, we have all these different management systems. So what was the answer of the TC309 so far? And please don't kill me, because this is a very personal structure. This is not an official structure of TC309. This is something that we were thinking about when we were talking about all those standards at our mirroring committee at DIN and the Virginia Compliance Center, to try to put those standards on a particular level of governance or the management level. And as you can see, we have a lot of them. Of course, all of them are published so far, only 4, not only, but still 4 of them. That's a huge number still. And then we have a lot of standards under construction, some of them for assessing the efficiency of governance maturity model, and so on. Then we have one very interesting approved, I think, meanwhile, approved work item, which is conflict of interest. Maybe we'll start works on general principles for ESG disclosure. That was subject to a, I can tell you, very, very, very controversial discussion at DIN in Germany, if this is the TC for this kind of standard, because this is also about environment and social aspects. But I think this is something we are going to discuss still on Friday. And then very interesting level, the management level, where we have the, as I would call it, standard of the standard, which is the compliance management system, and then some plugins regarding the tools like whistleblowing management system, internal investigations, which is the natural consequence of investigating a non-compliance case. But we also have there, where Jean-Pierre was reporting on, the so-called risk plugins, which are standards concerning particular compliance risk, like, for example, for corruption. So now the last slide maybe, so that I could show you some benefits of this integrated approach, because we are now talking about the 37002 whistleblowing management system. And when you look at a very normal and actually the better word would be not normal, but normalized, because those elements that you can see here are elements originating from the ISO 37301, from the Compliance Management System standard. Those are the main, the key elements of a compliance management system. So background of the organization, leadership, policy, we all know all of this because this is actually part of the high-level structure, which is enabling this integrated approach. And then, on the other hand, when we see what whistleblowing management is delivering for a compliance management system, it is obvious that only an integrated approach makes sense. Because, as you can see, first, the reporting channel, the whistleblowing channel, is the source of information. I see your look. I have to end now. No? The source of information about the background of the organization as well. For the leadership, it could be a non-compliance situation with the leadership as well. So if we have an external reporting channel, as ISO 37002 is suggesting, that would be the way also to get some information on that. Also feedback for policy when assigning the roles for the system, supporting evaluation, very important, feedback, what is happening in the organization, and then at the same time for the improvement. I will skip the functional approach of whistleblowing management system, which is very important, not only for the compliance management, but also for governance and the whole organization. Because as you can see here, the goal of whistleblowing management system is to break the uncontrolled evaluation from non-compliance to a newspaper scandal even that could turn out in a huge damage on the reputation of the organization. So one can even say that a single reporting person can save the whole organization. So this is the huge importance of whistleblowing. So the last slide, what would or could an integrated approach generate first some integration effects and integration benefits. So two groups of results. First, regarding the effects of integration, and by integration I mean the integration of whistleblowing management system with compliance management system and compliance management system as a part of integrated governance approach, higher degree of sustainability of integrated systems, encouraging for example, whistleblowing policy in the overall risk portfolio. So the perception of this aspect is higher also within the top management. Reduction of cost and complexity by simplifying the structures and procedures, higher efficiency and at the same time lower costs, so cost effectiveness, avoidance of competence conflicts and complementary relationships, because we have similar elements in all of these kind of management systems. And the last slide, further integration benefits, support for efficiency, that was mentioned before. And what is, I think, also very important is that the easier the system and the higher the transparency, the higher the willingness also to accept it by the employees and other members of the organizations, the higher the trust toward the process, and at the same time it's strengthening the corporate culture and transparency. So that was a short comment from my side on the ISO 37002 whistleblowing management system. I would like very much to share with you the experience so far, but we don't have any numbers on that, like numbers regarding how many organizations are implementing, or even because this is not a requirement standard, so maybe they're using it like a checkbox to just to find out, to control their implemented whistleblowing system with the state of the art that is stated in the ISO 37002. So I don't have these numbers to share with you, but I've heard from many companies, not only in Germany, in other countries all over the world also, that this standard is becoming more and more important, and it will become very important in the European Union, at least because we are now in the process of implementing. In many countries it's been implemented already, in some countries, including Germany, not yet, but still this year, the EU whistleblowing directive, so that almost all companies, there are some requirements, but almost all companies will be legally obliged to implement whistleblowing management systems without the details. So there will be obligation to have this system, but without having the obligation to have this, and that. So that opens the way, the space for application of the ISO standards. So probably that will be a breakthrough in Europe for ISO 37002. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bart. We go to our next presenter, who will look at ISO 37301 and its application in China. She's Jessica Wang, and she's the secretary of the ISO TC309 WG4 Compliance Management Systems. All right, so she's just going to get her laptop for the presentation. All right, so again, if you have any questions, you can feel free to share those online, because we will be going, well, no, we'll be having a break actually after the final presentation. Then after the break, we come back to the Q&A. But in the meantime, feel free to share your messages to the platform.
Good afternoon, every experts and our leaderships from TC309. I'm very glad to be here, and I have be invited as the guest to be the representative of TC309 W Working Group 4 to be here to sharing the implementation experience of our compliance management system, especially in China. So I would like to try to see what we have applied this ISO 37309 in China. So here we can see that ISO TC309 Working Group 4 was established just in 2018 in September. That Working Group 4 just stepped by TG5, which was published ISO 19600, which was guidance international standard. But to face the challenges of uncertainty and sustainable development, as well as the requirements from the stakeholders. So we just established the Working Group 4 and organized experts from 33 national member bodies and 2 external liaison groups to try. We just go through 30 months and has disposal of 1,700 more than these comments. Yes, yeah. After this kind of hard work, just this ISO 37309 was published in 2021, April 13th. Yes. So this standard, as the other management system standards, it is a robust, systematic management system standard. It is a useful management instrument to go through the operation procedure management, it is very, it is placed very more emphasis on governing body and top management leadership, as well as it is how to say, it is put more emphasis on engagement and the implementation of our organization, the personnel under the control of our of the organizations. So we can see here these requirement international standard have the how to say, have the emphasize on four aspects usage. The first one is the legislation. Just this standard will be referenced in laws to guide and standardize the development of various of organizations and industries. So here we can see that most of the country has already released more and more strict laws or legislations all over the world. As that's the same in China. And the second one is administration or regulation or just judicial bodies. This standard can provide a reference to adopt the organization's compliance management system, and these practices will be as the basis of the sentence or of the enterprises or organizations involved in violation or non-compliance. Yeah. For the organizations, this standard will provide a robust systematic method for the organization to improve its compliance management capabilities and a sustainable development, especially high quality development with regarding to the first class enterprises or organizations. At the same time, it can also be used as the self-declaration conforms to the facility to development for trade and the other international communication activities. The last one is the conformity assessment bodies. These bodies can use the formulate certification rules according to the standard and carry out third-party certification works. Yeah. That's the full aspects usage or application of our compliance management system standard. Especially the implementation in China. After its publication in 2021, it's already past 2 years. So just a few days ago, 4/13 is the nearly the 2 years anniversary. Yeah, for this international standard. And in China, from the top management, we really put more emphasis and pay more attention on this compliance management system international standard. And it was used to be the reference to do more admention of the legislation, and also was reference to a lots of regulation definition of the supervision institute. So we can see from the slide that from the legislation part, we have already amended the criminal law of the People's Republic of China, the antitrust, the personal information security, data security, export control, economic sanction, and the other lots of subject or domains. For the supervision part, we have already just released the measures for the compliance management of central enterprises. And this was a formal released regulation from the SASAC, from under our national council. So the other is the SPP, that's the Supreme Protocol rate. It also released the guiding opinions on establishing a third-party compliance supervision and evaluation mechanism to enterprise involved involved with violations or non-compliances. So from China, we have already do a lot of standardization practices. The first of all, after the publication of the international standard from April 2021, we have at the same time, we have already transferred that international standard to our national standard adopted as 35770-2022. So in the other subjects, industry sectors, we also made lots of just like association standards regarding to their specific domains or sectors. Just like the SMC's association, they has already released association standard just for SMC compliance management evaluation of all their evaluation of efficiency. The other one is the compliance code for the pharmaceutical industry, and the other I didn't list it all of the association standards, but also some other local standards. We have a lots of practical choice. So that's the implementation about from the regulations for regional standardization rules level. We have made a lots of practical experience in China. Here, we have the model because for the integrated governance, we have already tried to see the compliance management system not only will they be used or implemented in the organizations, it has already be put in a very high level, just like the governing body or the top management, they have already aware of the importance. It has already played a very important role for the corporate governance in the real or actual operation of the organization. So most of the country, most of the organization, while they try to establish the system, the compliance system, they will try to integrate legal compliance, internal control, risk management, governance, and even the inter-party supervision. Integrate together all these systems to be combined or collaborated